All right. Welcome everyone to Skeptical Inquirer Presents. This is a series of live online presentations from experts who are devoted to advancing science over pseudoscience, media literacy over conspiracy theories, and critical thinking over magical thinking. I'm your host, Leanne Lord. I'm a stand-up comedian, author, Center for Inquiry Fellow, and fellow Earth dweller. Today happens to be the International Day of Light, and we hope that you find this show in general, and this episode in particular, to be very enlightening. Thank you so much for joining us. All of you who are with us right now in real time, who have the opportunity to ask questions by typing them into the Q&A box. We'll get to as many of them as we can. And special thanks to those of you who are watching the recording. But no matter when you're watching, please be sure to check out the latest episode of Point of Inquiry, available wherever you get your podcasts. And if you haven't already, please round out your reading list with Skeptical Inquirer magazine. You can subscribe to it at skepticalinquirer.org. Registration is open for SciCon 2024. It will be in Las Vegas, baby, October 24th through the 27th. Now, tonight's topic is the Christian nationalist threat to American democracy with our guest, Dr. Bradley Onishi. He's the author of the book Preparing for War. I have a copy, and I have to tell you, whenever I get these books, they somehow disappear from my library because other folks in here find these books compelling. So I had to sort of hide this one so I would have it for us tonight. But the title is Preparing for War, the Extremist History of White Christian Nationalism and What Comes Next. While it's long been a presence in American culture, the past decade has seen an acceleration of white Christian nationalist rhetoric and tactics. It's now an openly authoritarian movement whose leaders long for a post-constitutional, okay, I promised I wasn't going to do that, post-constitutional America and a non-democratic form of governance. Christian nationalism is more than faith combined with patriotism. It's a movement designed to impose one vision of Christianity on all others, a religious mission of conquest and domination. As the 2024 elections approach, the dangers of this movement are becoming more apparent. Our guest will walk us through the historical contours of white Christian nationalism and the threat it poses to American democracy. He is a social commentator, scholar, and co-host of Straight White American Jesus, a podcast about the politics and culture of the religious right, which I might add, the podcast regularly ranks in the top 50 of political shows on Apple's podcast. That's no small accomplishment. He's a TEDx speaker and he teaches at the University of San Francisco. So please welcome to the Skeptical Inquirer Presents Screen, Professor Bradley Onishi. Professor, you have the con, my fellow Star Trek fan.
Thank you so much, Leanne, for that introduction. And it's absolutely wonderful to be here and so excited to get to share with this community. And even if it is a topic that is quite difficult. So let me go ahead and jump in and talk about Christian nationalism and the threat to American democracy. So, as Leanne said, I am the author of Preparing for War, and I host Straight White American Jesus. We really try to unpack on that show what Christian nationalism is and why it has such a dominant effect on American culture and politics. We don't think that Jesus was white, straight, or American, but we want to figure out why so many people do and what that means. Let me start today by talking about what Christian nationalism is and some numbers related to Christian nationalism. We are hearing a lot in the news today that Christian nationalism is nothing but Christians who love America. What's wrong with that? And I want to go through some data that shows us that that's not nearly the entire story. And in fact, it's kind of a way for the Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the world to try to weasel out of something I think is a lot more insidious. So this is from Pew Research in 2022. And it says 2/3 of Republicans and independents who lean toward the GOP say the U.S. should be a Christian nation, more than double the share of Democrats and Democratic leaners with the same view. Republicans are also far more likely than Democrats to say the founders intended for the country to be a Christian nation, and they are less likely to think the country is presently a Christian nation. So I think a couple things are going to come in to view here in a minute. 2/3 of Republicans think that the U.S. should be a Christian nation. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, they think that the founders wanted it to be a Christian nation, and yet they would say 29% of them versus 39% would say that the country is not presently a Christian nation. The story that many folks are telling, conservative Americans who think the country should be a Christian nation are telling is this: it should be a Christian nation, it's supposed to be a Christian nation, but it's not a Christian nation. So we have to fix that. Now, this is a somewhat open-ended question. The question that Pew asked is this a Christian nation? Should it be a Christian nation? There's another set of research that we can point to that says, actually, let me just stop and give you one more thing here. The question is, should this be a Christian nation? So most adults in the United States say the founders of the United States originally intended it to be a Christian nation. Many of you are shaking your heads. Many of you are frustrated. Many of you have read Andrew Seidel's The Founding Myth, and you just can't believe what you're hearing. More than 4 in 10 Americans say the country should be a Christian nation. Compared with non-Christians, Christians are much more likely to say the founders intended for the U.S. to be a Christian nation, and that it should be a Christian nation. So if you're a Christian person, 70% of you are saying it was supposed to be a Christian nation, and 62% of you say it should be, okay? Once again, far less likely if you're a Christian to think that this currently is a Christian nation. So again, the story is, started as a Christian nation, should be a Christian nation, but it's not a Christian nation. What are we going to do about it? That's the main outline of the story. Now, this is from PRRI, the Public Religion Research Initiative, and it is more recent, and they had a somewhat different set of questions. So the questions they asked were, the U.S. government should declare America a Christian nation. So it's not, should this be a Christian nation? It's a little more, that's an open-ended question. This is a little more specific. The government should do something. Like the government should declare it, right? Something from Congress, an executive order, whatever it may be. U.S. laws should be based on Christian values. If the U.S. moves away from our Christian foundations, we'll no longer have a country. Being Christian is important to being truly American. And God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of American society. They use these questions to kind of put people on a scale. Adherents to Christian nationalism, sympathizers to Christian nationalism, skeptics of Christian nationalism, and rejectors, right? Most folks in this room right now are rejectors, right? Outright. So the results they got went like this. The U.S. government should declare America a Christian nation. When they asked that question, all Americans, they got 10% of people who were sympathetic with that. And they got another, or I'm sorry, that said yes. And they got another 17% that said, yeah, I'd be open to that, basically. So you've got about a quarter of the country that thinks the government should declare America a Christian nation. U.S. laws should be based on Christian values. You've got 40% of the country that either says a wholehearted yes or yeah, that might be a good idea. I'm sympathetic with that, and so on. You've got about 38% that say if we move away from our, quote, Christian foundations, we'll no longer have a country. So what I'm trying to say here is there are a lot of Americans who think this was a Christian nation, it should be a Christian nation, and there's even folks, about a quarter, that thinks the government should declare it a Christian nation, and that our laws should be based on Christian values, and if we are no longer Christian, we will no longer have a country. This is not a small group of people in our midst. Now, if we dig into what this means, and I don't have time to do this in great detail, but there's just been a lot of studies that show us that Christian nationalism is a predictor of certain policies and political views. So if we look here, this is from the same study. By margin of nearly 2-to-1, Americans believe that the growing number of newcomers strengthens the country, right? So 2-to-1 newcomers make the country stronger. But if you test for Christian nationalism, sympathizers and adherents, like a large percentage of them disagree that immigrants strengthen the country. There's a great book by Janelle Wong that shows us that white evangelicals, many of whom are Christian nationalists, are the most extreme group in the country to the right on immigration, right? So what I'm trying to say here is it's not just that folks think this should be a Christian nation. This leads to certain policy positions and political ideas, right? Among Christian nationalism sympathizers and adherents who are white, agreement rises to 77 and 80% about what? About this. The American way of life needs to be protected from foreign influence. So you can see that Christian nationalism, especially among white Christian nationalists, leads to this disagreement that newcomers make the country better, and the American way of life needs to be protected from foreign influence, whatever that may be. A couple more things here that I want to highlight, and then I will get away from the numbers and into the story. There is a real difference between white Christian nationalists and other Christian nationalists. What you find, and I'll get into this more in a minute, is that most white Christian nationalists will tell you the country used to be a Christian nation. It used to be a city on a hill. It was supposed to be, but it no longer is. And most of them think the 1960s are the time when it all went bad. By contrast, if you ask Black Americans who think this should be a Christian nation, if you ask a Black American who says should be a Christian nation, what they're going to tell you is the country's never really lived up to being a Christian nation, but maybe it could one day, right? So if you look at the bullet point here, second from bottom, white Christian nationalists are far more likely than Hispanic and Black Christian nationalists to prioritize immigration and access to guns. If you go up to the middle one, Black Christian nationalists are only slightly more likely than Black Americans overall to hold favorable views of Trump. So even if you're a Black Christian nationalist, there's a very good chance you're not into hardcore views on immigration. You're not into the 45th president. You don't really get into MAGA politics, perhaps, right? That's what it's telling us. So when we talk about Christian nationalism, for me, the white and white Christian nationalism and the Black and Black Christian nationalism and so on is actually quite important. Now, if those numbers aren't bad enough, here's one more before I jump into some other things. My colleague Paul Jupe at Denison University did a study, and he found that 9% of Americans want only Christians to be citizens. That's 1 out of 10 people. 14% think the church should have a veto on the government's laws, and can talk more about where that comes from. But that leads to something I want to talk about at length today. And that is what I call the authoritarian turn in Christian nationalism. The thesis that I want to put forth, I'll give to you in a second. But before I get there, let me play this video for you from January 14, 2024. And this is the start of the Iowa caucuses just a couple of months ago.
The other day, Donald Trump said on his first day he's going to be a dictator for a day.
I like that. Yeah, I like that.
Would you rather have Donald Trump as a dictator for 4 years or re-elect Joe Biden for 4 years?
I would rather have Donald Trump. I'd like to see the repeal the Roosevelt law so that he can be a president for a lot more than 4 years. But this country needs a dictator. I hate to say that, but it's the truth.
Okay, I hope you could hear that. I know it's always tricky with these presentations to get clear audio, but he says at the end there, this country needs a dictator. I hate to say it, but this country needs a dictator. The thesis I want to give you today is that we've reached a point not only where democracy is not a sacred value to many Americans, but at which they are ready to express that fact proudly in public. There is an authoritarian threat to American democracy, and Christian nationalism is a driving force of this threat. The 2024 elections, as a result, will decide the direction of this country for generations. So what I want to put forth, and I'll hopefully convince you of this in the next couple of minutes, is that if you're a Christian nationalist who, especially a white Christian nationalist, who think that the country used to be great, it used to be a Christian country, it used to be the country that the founders envisioned, but it no longer is. And that started in the 1960s. And now we're 60 years later, and things are just really, really bad. And I'll show you how they think about this in a minute. And, you know, we just don't seem to have the majority. The country keeps getting more non-Christian, more non-religious, more nuns, more secularists, more humanists, more atheists. It keeps getting more diverse, more Black folks, more brown folks, more Asian folks, more people from other places. It seems like we've lost the majority. It seems like we don't win the popular vote very often unless we claim it was stolen or rigged. What are we going to do about that? And what I want to say today, and I'll prove this, hopefully with some good evidence, is that the conclusion they've come to is democracy may not be the answer, it may be the problem. Because we are the ones, the Christians, who were chosen by God to carry out the vision of the founders. We should be the ones in charge. If we're not in charge, the country will go down the drain quickly, and it already is. Just look around you, and if you watch Fox News, that's what you hear all the time. So the place where they get is maybe democracy is not the ideal form of governance, and maybe we should look to other ways of constructing this country and its leadership. So I think there's three main components at play in this story that Christian nationalism tells about our country. There's the myth of the Christian nation. Hey, this was supposed to be a Christian nation. It used to be one, and it is no longer. There's a nostalgia for past glory. There's this nostalgia for something that never really existed, this mythological historical past that was the Pax Americana and is now gone. And then there's this apocalyptic view of the nation's future. Hey, if we don't do this now, if we don't come to the rescue, if we aren't the big main characters who saved the day from the final boss, then this country won't exist and it will be all over for everybody. So I've already talked about this when I was going through the numbers, but Christian nationalists believe the country was built for and by Christians. We saw that in the Pew data. We saw that in the PRRI data. They see themselves as central to the narrative of the United States. Like I just said, we are the inheritors of the true American founding. We are building the nation that was supposed to be built if they would let us and get out of our way. We believe that the United States was chosen by God to play a unique role in history. We're the ones who are carrying out this divinely appointed aspect of the United States in history. Now, one of the things I want to just stop and say is that we've looked at data already that shows that there's Christian nationalism in our country, that there's a significant number of folks who think this should be a Christian country, that think the government should declare it a Christian country, and so on and so forth. A lot of those folks may not be regular church goers. They may not be regular Bible readers. And you're saying, hold on a minute, that makes no sense. You want this to be a Christian country and you don't go to church. And the way to explain that is that Christian nationalism is a cultural identity. It's a story you tell about yourself and your nation. It's a story that gives you a past and a present and a future. It gives you a role to play in the world. So you might be somebody who hasn't been to church in 5 years, but you really think, hey, this country is going down the drain. And, you know, what we really need is to return to our godly roots, our Christian values. And that means cracking down on immigration. That means a Muslim ban. That means not allowing gay people to get married, right? And even though I haven't read the Bible in a while and I haven't been to church in a long time, I'm telling a story that gives me a character to play, and it gives me an understanding of the past and the future, and I get to adopt myself into that narrative. A lot of folks hold Christian nationalist ideals and identities, even if they have not been to a Christian service in a long time. We can come back to that if we'd like. I'll go through this quickly, but there's a nostalgia for past glory. There's a sense in which Christian nationalists really think that the country used to be great, but it is no longer. Now, when was it great? The 1950s. So in 2016, 70% of white evangelicals told Public Religion Research Institute, PRRI, that they believe the country has changed for the worse since the 1950s. Now, of course, the 1950s were a time before the schools were integrated, before the end of Jim Crow, before the Civil Rights Act, before the Voting Rights Act, before immigration reform, before The Feminine Mystique was published, before the Loving Case made interracial marriage protected in all 50 states, before Stonewall. I could go on and on and on and on. So when folks say that we used to be great in the 1950s, they're saying it used to be great for a certain amount of people that really count. It may not have been great for everyone, but that doesn't matter. What matters is it was great in the way God wanted it to be great, and it was great for me. So that's where we want to go back to. Timothy Gogolin says it this way. He works at Focus on the Family, and he was part of the Bush administration. We have to remember that it's not just the Judeo-Christian tradition where the country was founded, but in the social and in the moral revolution of the 60s and 70s, that was a frontal assault directly on the Beatitudes, on the Ten Commandments, on the whole body of ethics that forms the Judeo-Christian foundation of the USA. The 60s are the time, the sexual revolution, all the things where everything went wrong. And, the 60s were not perfect, and there's so much to say about them. But there's so much in the legacy of the 60s that has built the America that we know today, all the things I just mentioned. And yet for this group of Americans, this is the time when the country lost itself and really went down the tube. This has led to the place, if you don't believe me, where Charlie Kirk, who is one of the most prominent American conservatives in the country and one of the most prominent Christian nationalists in the country, somebody I call the Christian Nationalist Youth Pastor of America, he had this to say when it came to Martin Luther King Jr. In January of this year. The deification of MLK and his proto-DEI ideology marks the exact moment that the progress of Black America goes sideways. Their cities disintegrate, their families collapse, educational progress stagnates, they become enormously dependent on government, crime explodes, blah, 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 blah. He even said that that Martin Luther King Jr. was a bad guy. So we've arrived at a place where it's not the really irritating and irksome conservative American quoting Martin Luther King Jr. on Martin Luther King Jr. Day in order to somehow give weight to their very conservative approach to guns or immigration or police brutality, whatever it may be. We've gotten to the point where someone like Charlie Kirk is openly saying Martin Luther King Jr., just a bad person, just not worth celebrating, and you all should see him as a negative force in American history. That's stunning, and yet he says it out in the open, and he gets more popular for saying it, not less. Now, the final defining trait of Christian nationalism is its apocalyptic tone. There's a sense in which the end of the world, which evangelical Christians and many others have been fixated on for a long time, the idea that the world is going to end. Well, there's a sense here that if the country is not righted by God-loving patriots, then the United States will end, that the American apocalypse will come. This is why you always hear about Joe Biden being a Marxist globalist and the radical agenda of the Biden administration. And I'm not here to advocate for Joe Biden or his administration, but I know my history enough to know that when he's called a Marxist, it definitely makes me think twice, because when I've studied the history of Marxism, going back to Marx and then maybe to Trotsky and Lenin and whoever, Frederick Jameson, whoever we want to talk about, yeah, certainly Joe Biden is not in there. He's been a moderate in the Senate for 7 or 8 decades now, and but yet, why does that fly? Why does that get you points in this world? Because what you're doing is scaring people and saying, if you elect Joe Biden, he's a radical. He wants to upend your way of life. He wants to destroy America. There's a constant sense of crisis, a constant sense that unless we act right now, the country will end. Now, this is directly, for me, tied to the authoritarian turn that I'm talking about today. Imminent apocalypse means that extremism is justified, right? I live in California. We have earthquakes here. I have small children. When I leave the house with those small children, it usually takes me 47 minutes to get out of the house. We have to get diapers and water and a change of clothes, and we got to get everybody dressed and change the diaper, and we got to get milk and we need the thing. And by the time I know it, it's taken me 54 minutes to get out of the house, and all I wanted to do was go down the street to Target and come home. Okay. Well, if there's an earthquake, I don't wait for that. I don't think about the future. I don't do the best practices. I don't put in place my long-term parenting strategies, healthy snacks, and all that. You know what I do? Get the kids, get under the table, run outside, whatever I can do. Because when you're in an extreme, dangerous situation, you don't think about long-term rules, practices, etc. You think about right now. And so if we are in an apocalypse, if you act with an extreme agenda, you're not doing something wrong, you're doing something right because you recognize the threat. You're willing to take decisive action, and you're not going to let your family, your country, your way of life be stolen from you, be destroyed by those who hate this country and hate you. It also means this: if you don't have the demographics or the people, your best bet is to do away with democracy to save the nation. Why would you wait on the slow process of democracy? Why would you wait for a majority to vote on the thing? If you're actually in an apocalypse, you don't have time for that. So for some white Christian nationalists, authoritarianism is an answer to the democracy problem. Restoring America does not mean restoring democracy. It means just the opposite. Democracy is not the sacred value in the equation. It's not the goal. The goal is power. The goal is to colonize Earth for God. If democracy becomes a problem rather than a solution, then put democracy aside. Again, we're dealing with folks who believe this should be a Christian country. They are the Christians who know what God wants for the country. And if you won't let them in power, it's not just a matter of you voting them out. It's that you have voted out the very foundation of the country in its cosmic sense. So if you have to do away with the democratic process in order to gain power, that's fine, because God wants you in power. God has commissioned you. God has given you dominion over the earth to become his representative. 28% of Republicans strongly agree or agree that Americans may have to resort to violence in order to get the country back on track. Let's look at some specific examples of how we got this guy, right? Here's our guy, Iowa caucuses, saying,
Donald Trump said on his first day he's going to be a dictator. But this country needs a dictator.
This country needs a dictator. Now, hey, this is a man on the street. This is a guy at the Iowa caucuses. We could all write him off. Hey, this is not a good example. Come on, this is a dude that is a radical, a fanatic. He's decked out in Trump gear. Come on, what's the big deal? But to me, this guy is downstream from leaders, from intellectuals, from pastors who are putting this idea in the water. Him saying this is a matter of a downstream set of reception of ideas that have been propagated by a group of Christian nationalists who believe this is true.
The other day, Donald Trump said on his first day.
Example number one is Kevin Slack. Kevin Slack works at Hillsdale College, and he wrote a book called War on the American Republic. At some point in the decline of every empire, it finally dawns on a truly great leader, one born of the family of the lion or the tribe of the eagle. I don't know what that means. Maybe some of you do. I could run this thing. The new right now often discusses a red Caesar, by which it means a leader whose post-constitutional rule will restore the strength of his people. There is the post-constitutional part, there is the autocratic part, and there is the longing for Caesar. Some of you may remember a month or two ago when all of the jokes were out about men in the Roman Empire. Well, here is a man thinking about the Roman Empire. A red Caesar who will save us from ourselves. A red Caesar who says, I could run this thing. A red Caesar who will pick up the pieces of a country devoid of God and devoid of direction and will make it all better. There's Michael Anton. Michael Anton works at the Claremont Institute. Many of you will know the Claremont Institute from John Eastman, the lawyer for Donald Trump, who helped to construct the entire fake electors scheme and so on, who's now been disbarred and is in big trouble. The Claremont Institute is out here in California. It's become kind of the intellectual think tank of MAGAism. And here's what Michael Anton says. We may define Caesarism as authoritarian one-man rule partially legitimized by necessity. That necessity is the breakdown of republican constitutional rule, or if you want to put it bluntly, the corruption of the people. A nation no longer capable of ruling itself must be ruled. Only dogmatic libertarians look forward to anarchy, and none have yet found a way to make it work. So Caesar gets a lot out of Caesarism. That's great. But what does the nation get? Well, there's some things that are advantageous for the nation. It might be that the best option for the nation is to work towards such a problematic regime. All right. Once again, a situation where, hey, it's worth considering this option. Maybe this is the thing that we need in light of what we're facing as a nation. Here's Patrick Deneen, philosopher at Notre Dame University. Today's widespread yearning for a strong leader, one with the will to take back popular control over liberalism's forms of bureaucratized government and globalized economy, comes after decades of liberal dismantling of cultural norms and political habits essential to self-governance. Deneen makes it clear, right? Because we're in crisis, remember what I said earlier? Because we're in apocalypse, we need a radical answer. So the yearning, hey, it's not our fault that we yearn for a strong leader. It's not my fault I lay awake at night dreaming of Caesar. You made me do it. Liberals, you made me do it. Liberalism, you made me do it because the country was dismantled and you've destroyed it all. I mean, it's not my fault. Of course, I get some tea at night, sit in my chair and just wonder, where is my Caesar? That's just, what else would I do? Now we have Doug Wilson. Doug Wilson is an author and pastor and church leader in Idaho, Moscow, Idaho. He's somebody who has an immense influence. He is not only a pastor of a church, he leads a seminary. He has his own publishing house. My guess is that about 1 million people listen to Doug Wilson on any given week through his various channels, whether it's books, whether it's podcast, whether it's preaching, and so on. He's repeatedly disavowed any interest in national electoral politics, yet he says the eventual aim is theocracy, a network of nations bound together by a formal acknowledgement of the lordship of Jesus Christ, as opposed to secular society ruled by civil governments. These are necessary, satanic, demonic, and influenced by the god of this world, who is the devil. All right, so we've really gotten away here from any kind of nuance or complexity. There's a binary. There is a theocracy, which is nations that acknowledge the lordship of Jesus Christ, and then there are civil governments, which are demonic. Nothing in between. There goes the American public square, the American experiment, the nation of immigrants working together for something audacious, equality, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Nope, demonic. Satanic. Intolerable, according to Wilson. Now we get to Stephen Wolfe. Stephen Wolfe wrote this book, The Case for Christian Nationalism. The Case for Christian Nationalism, when it debuted, reached the top 100 on Amazon. There's whatever it may be, 15 million books or so on Amazon. So if you reach the top 100, that is quite a feat. It stayed in the top 500 for quite a while. My point with saying that is this is not a manifesto written by somebody who nobody is listening to. This is a book that found its way into the hands of many pastors and seminarians and Christian leaders and politicians. Stephen Wolfe thinks that what we really need is a Christian prince. Through him, as the mediator of divine rule, the prince brings God near to the people. The prince is a sort of national God, not in the sense that of being divine or as an object of prayer. So we're not going to pray to this guy and we're not going to think he's, actually God himself, but as the mediator of divine rule for this nation and one with divinely granted power to direct them in their national completeness. So yeah, we're not going to worship him, but he's the one in charge and he's the mediator of divine rule and he will direct us in our national completeness. Just him alone. He embodies the people. So the entire people are embodied by this one person. by divine power, executes their will for themselves. Because once again, they're not able to do it themselves. The will of the people, the voice of the people, kind of the basis of democracy. Not good. We need a prince who will give us our national completeness. It's like a twisted iteration of the reality show The Bachelor, I think. Anyway, now it somehow gets worse. So let's listen to Stephen Wolf talk about it, because maybe you don't believe me. Here we go.
The term Christian nationalism has been thrown around a lot lately, most of the time as a way to dismiss or mock anyone who wants to engage in politics as a Christian. But those of us who look to the broad Christian tradition should seize the term for ourselves. We are indeed Christian nationalists. The nation is not a mere collection of people, but a people united around a set of shared loves. Some of these loves are universal in all nations, such as the love of family and home. Other loves are more particular to each nation, such as shared culture, language, and national struggles and achievements. Together, these loves form a nation's way of life, generating a love for the place in which you and your ancestors conducted that way of life. Johann Herder once said that everyone loves his country, his manners, his language, his wife, his children, not because they are the best in the world, but because they are absolutely his own, and he loves himself and his own labors in them. Now, when we hear the term nationalism, many of us think of fascism or militarism, and there's a history of that in the world for sure. But it's better to think of the ism of nationalism as referring to the nation acting as a people for their national good. A Christian nation is a nation that is self-consciously Christian, and on that account seeks the nation's complete good, earthly and heavenly goods, for themselves and for their posterity. Now, the two ways that a people order themselves is through civil law and social customs. Civil laws, when just, are ordinances of God binding our conscience. Why? Because just laws are rooted in God's moral law. God's law is tailored for our good and happiness. Our highest happiness is found in eternal life. And so civil law ought to order us to the things of eternal life, word and sacrament. Civil law cannot compel belief in the gospel, nor that one worships God in heart, but it can create the best outward conditions for one to conduct undisturbed and focused worship of God. Thus, in addition to ensuring justice in our civil relations, civil authority can regulate the Sabbath day, for example, to remove those daily cares and concerns that distract us from Sunday worship. Though often defined by its abuse, cultural Christianity is vital to Christian nationalism. While civil law is an explicit ordering of society, cultural Christianity operates implicitly by establishing in us a positive, prejudicial regard for the gospel. It cannot bring us to faith, but it makes the truths of the faith plausible to us. Cultural Christianity also contributes to a more orderly, high-trust society, since everyone has a mutual expectation of Christian conduct. Thus, we have an explicit ordering of civil law and an implicit ordering by social custom. Together, these compose the sort of thing Christian nationalism is, what I call a totality of national action. This is a fancy way of saying that all things that a Christian nation would expect of us, both in law and custom, and no matter how mundane, are for the good of the whole. I'm Stephen.
All right. So I've read the book, unfortunately. I've written about it. And what he talks about in the book is that nations can only be founded on a shared ethnicity. Because, and I quote now, your kin have belonged to this people on this land, to this nation in this place. And so they bind you to that people in place, creating a common Volkgeist. It should be said that Stephen Miller has said on Twitter that in many cases, interracial marriage is probably a sin because it is bringing together people of a different ethnicity, those who do not have this shared sense of place or nation or culture. Wolf's argument for nationalism is based on the shared ethnicity of a Volk, based in blood relations, and that comes into focus when he explains his intended reader. I am male and I'm rooted ancestrally in Western Europe, and I'm speaking largely to a Western European male audience. So here we have a Christian nationalist who longs for a Christian prince, who uses the terms Volk and homeland to explain his understanding of how society should be ordered. He believes that our laws should bind us to God's understanding of human relations, and that cultural Christianity is a good thing because when all people are Christian, they trust each other and they have a sense of shared identity. Now, in my mind, all of this helps explain the white Christian nationalist admiration of Viktor Orban in Hungary and Vladimir Putin in Russia. They are iterations of this longing for a Caesar, for a prince, for a post-constitutional ruler. They're the real-life manifestations of the Christian prince, the protector of family, of sex, of gender, and of state, the one who holds all the bodies, fleshly and political, in line, in their place, and without fluidity or slippage or confusion. They're the ones who jettison foreign agents and queer elements. They criminalize difference. They mandate binaries and certainty. There really is a longing for Putin and Orban in these spaces. Once again, data from PRRI in 2018 and then reviewed in 2021 and 2022 showed us some things. The data captures Christian nationalist sentiments during Donald Trump's presidency, post-Trump, and after the Ukraine invasion based on responses to a series of survey questions. In 2018, respondents who indicated that America was or still is a Christian nation tended to score higher on favorability of Putin. Those who still believe the US is a Christian nation were also the most likely to be favorable towards Russia in the conflict. In 2021, the results were largely the same. As respondents scored higher on Christian nationalist measures, they were more likely to be favorable to Putin. So here is Lauren Witzka, who in 2020 was the candidate for Senate from the GOP in the state of Delaware, not state Senate, but the United States Congress. Well, that didn't work, did it? Let's see if it's going to work. There we go.
So, Russia is a Christian nationalist nation. They're actually Orthodox Christian and Russian Orthodox. So, I actually support Putin's right to protect his people and always put his people first, but also protect their Christian values. I identify more with with Putin's Christian values than I do with Joe Biden. So, there is that. There is that there. Christian nationalist countries also are a threat to the global regime, like the Luciferian regime. It wants to mash everything together, but Putin takes care of his people. He looks out for his people. I watched as he deported, they literally walked them through the streets, the criminal illegals who were coming into their country. They walked them out and they escorted them out and they said, get out. I can respect that. I can respect that. And I can respect the fact that Putin does everything he can to protect his people.
So there she is saying that once again. That was the GOP candidate for Senate in Delaware in 2020. White Christian American nationalists see autocratic regimes as the shining cities on a hill. They are the paragons of how to construct a pure society. Using the rhetoric of Christian heritage and family values, leaders like Orban and Putin give transcendent authority to their anti-democratic, anti-LGBTQ, and anti-pluralist modes of governance. So before I come here, and I'll wrap up, I promise. To me, the authoritarian turn in Christian nationalism really leads us here to thinking that Vladimir Putin is the kind of leader that you would want in the United States to make this a Christian nation once again. A bully, a brutalizer, somebody who criminalizes difference and has no mercy or compassion. This leads to the final thing I'll talk about today, which is there was a poll in 2023, about a year ago now, that said, this is among Trump voters, you feel like what they tell you is true. 71% said Trump. Like, if I hear Trump saying something, it's true, right? He's the unquestioned source. 63% friends and family, and then others. What does this mean for 2024? I think a lot of you have already heard of Project 2025, but this is the plan put forth by the Heritage Foundation and those who are rumored to be the next picks for Trump's administration, including his chief of staff. Here's what is in Project 2025, and I will be very brief. Put the FCC, the FTC, and Justice Department under executive control, put federal workers on Schedule F, gut the EPA, dismantle the FBI, break up the Department of Homeland Security, eliminate the Departments of Education and Commerce. In essence, expand the executive branch to the point where there is unprecedented power, what some would call a soft coup. Make it such that one man has control over so many aspects of the government, and that every department is politicized. It's a political appointment when you take a job as an entry-level worker at the Department of State or anywhere else. Oh, and presidential immunity. That's what's being argued right now. You're saying a president could sell pardons, could sell military secrets, could order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival. He would have to be and would speedily be impeached and convicted. But yes, that's the only way that, according to Trump's lawyers, he could be held accountable for anything he did. This is, of course, being heard by the Supreme Court currently. My takeaways: this election will shape the USA for a generation or longer. I'm not voting third party, and I'm happy to talk about that. It's not because I think Joe Biden is an unscathed, amazing leader. I'm not refusing to lock arms with anyone who is pro-democracy, and that includes religious people. And I'm going to find one way to be involved. I'm going to do something that will help us maintain what is at least a gesture towards democracy in this country. Going to be teaching about this all summer. If you or anyone you know would like to join me in further conversations, you can go to my website and see the courses I'll be teaching and the pop-up stuff I'll be doing. But I'll stop there and open it up for questions.
Oh my gosh, Bradley, thank you so much. And that's thank you in quotes. Like, you know, but I don't mean to be shady. I mean, it really was wonderful. But I'm like, wow, I should have really done this with a shot of bourbon in me. But thank you. I would absolutely love to hear more about the pop-ups that you're doing and not voting third party. But I mean, I'm sitting here and just listening to the Christian nationalism. Christian nationalists, it's an identity, and these folks might not even have gone to church. I wonder if they're even citizens. Like, they're just passing through. Maybe they're Canadian. I don't know. And they want to go back to when the country was great. And you said they're thinking that's the 1950s. I'd like to offer some alternative years, maybe 1618, maybe 1491, as other years that might possibly be great to some other people. And if they think MLK, Martin Luther King, is the bad guy, I don't want to know what they think of Malcolm X. Just putting that out there. What I'm astounded by is it's like they're pretending the separation of church and state is not even a thing. And you don't have to go to church. You don't have to read the Bible, I think, to know that, like, love thy neighbor is like up there. Like, are we just ignoring this? I'm grasping at straws here. I really am, because this is I've seen this movie, and the first time I saw it was called The Stepford Wives. This is very, very unnerving stuff. But I want to get to some of the questions that we have, and y'all, I love y'all in here in the comments. Y'all gonna make me put on my glasses for this very first question, because this type keeps getting smaller and smaller. Of course, I don't see where my glasses are, but I'm gonna read this because I want to get this right. Bradley, Ray is asking, well, Ray said that the January 6th committee avoided any discussion of Christian nationalism. That seems to have been a political decision rather than data-driven. It took the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty and Freedom from Religion Foundation to get actual information out. Do you see any sign that the political decisions in Washington, D.C. will be different? Yeah. It seems like even if there is a groundswell of anti-Christianity, supposedly, it'll fall on either deaf or uncaring ears. That's a lot.
It's a great question, Ray, and you're absolutely right. So I've worked with Amanda Tyler at the BJC. I'm worked with Andrew Seidel at Freedom from Religion Foundation, and now at Americans United. Great people, and they worked hard to really show us the Christian nationalist elements of January 6th. And I wholeheartedly agree that this was a stunning omission, and I think very political reasons behind it. It remains very difficult for politicians in this country to criticize Christianity without being labeled people who hate America, people who hate God, people who hate our country, and so on. And so I'll just be honest, I think that the Liz Cheneys of the world still held on hope that they would have a political future. And they really thought that if they criticized Christianity in this way, it would be one step too far for the American public, who might be listening to all this damning evidence about January 6th, but certainly would not blame all the Christians, which is how it's sold in the media. There is hope, at least in small corners of DC. I think of Jamie Raskin and Jared Huffman, who lead the, Jared Huffman, the only humanist in the Congress. And I think of their efforts to really expose Christian nationalism and discuss it. But this is one of the things I've said for a long time, which is if you're in the mainstream media and you talk like this, Joy Reid has done it. There's been some others. You will get more hate mail and more concern from executives than if you say or criticize almost anything else. So this is a huge problem, and you're really pointing it out very well.
And thanks for that question. This really jumps into some thorny waters. I think it's a deceptively simple question. So I'm jumping around, and I want to ask this one. William says, "How do you see AI as fitting into this theocratic view?" Because does Skynet have a dog in this fight?
I don't know. I can say that I think we are in a time when AI is accelerating in a manner that we probably, most of us at least, have not taken full stock of. I do think that AI can be a way that we can understand the projected desires of people. So I will say I have seen on social media Christian nationalists who have told AI what to make when they want their utopia, when they want their desired space or community to look like. And as somebody else in the question panel has said, they often look like the final scene of Lord of the Rings or something out of a kind of epic where the kingdom is restored and there's a grand European castle where the benevolent king has restored his people to a life of flourishing and wonder. So I think AI is a way that AI is what we feed it. And if you ask the Christian nationalists to tell AI what they want, you get a kind of telling thing. So I'm not sure if that's much of a satisfying answer. But one last thing I'll say is, going back a long time, Christians in this country have used technological advancement as a means to signal the apocalypse is near. So when I was a young evangelical in the 90s, when the European Union formed, we were told that is where the Antichrist would become the leader of the new one world government, and that he would implant a chip in everyone to track them, and that if you refused, you would be killed or sent off to jail or whatever. So
I remember that.
Yes, that's been around, right? And AI, I'm certain, now that the fourth version of ChatGPT is out and you can talk to it and it can talk to you, I am sure there are sermons across America where this is surely the sign of the Antichrist and the devil. Now, don't get me wrong, there's aspects of AI that scare me too, but they don't scare me because I think that the computer's demon-possessed. I think they scare me for other reasons.
I just want to point out that one person's shining city on a hill is another person's Mordor.
That's exactly, that's such a good way to put it. Wow. That's
every
amazing.
now and then, the brain cells work.
Wow.
Don wants to know, what are your thoughts about how successful Christian nationalists will be in swaying the next election?
Yeah.
I mean, I think I'm a little biased because of what I'm taking in. It seems like the end is nigh, the sky is falling. Is it?
So the thing that gives me hope is that if we look at the last couple of years, especially in off-season elections, we see that they're losing. So that could be reproductive rights in Kansas. That could be reproductive rights in Nebraska. That could be governor's races in Arizona. That could be reproductive rights in Arizona. That could be trying to institute all kinds of draconian measures. Now, so Trumpian candidates, MAGA candidates have lost special elections. They have lost in districts where Trump won, and so on. There are reasons for hope. There are reasons to think that people are going to vote for democracy. They're going to vote for autonomy over their bodies, and so on and so forth. Nonetheless, the question that's being asked is a really good explanation as to why you have seen so much activism in schools, around libraries, because they have known for a long time, family values is a code word for, if we can scare you about your children, we can get you. And I'm not thinking of the folks that are probably in this chat right now. I'm thinking of that suburban mom who's not political and doesn't watch political news all the time and is not reading the books and is not listening to the podcasts and is generally not a kind of hardcore right-wing person. But you know what? I heard at soccer practice that they're trying to like teach my kid pornography in the 4th grade. They're going to be doing health class with naked pictures. And, you know, there's a lot of people in my 2nd grade kids class teaching them about trans rights. It's too much. It's too much. I don't think I like that. That's the bet. Can we get them scared enough that they'll come with us? And that's where, you know, there's a lot of energy being expelled. And that could be about immigrants. That could be about children. But that is why you see Moms for Liberty and the so many other groups popping up, because this is the goal. Scare you enough about your children that we can get you with us, even though you know better.
That really resonated actually in your talk when you talked about how differently we respond as humans when we are constantly being frightened. When you're always at DEF CON, and I always get this one wrong, at DEF CON 1 as opposed to DEF CON 5, you know, the house is on fire, you're not going to be making the best decisions, and that's intentional.
Yeah.
You know, I personally have had to sort of monitor or my own social media engagement, you know, because it was politics and chaos, and now it's politics and puppies,
Yep.
chaos and kittens. So that I have a bit of a breather, so I'm not always reacting, because it's just, and mind you, I don't have kids, but you know, that doesn't mean I'm disengaged about caring
Oh yeah,
about
totally.
what happens. And honestly, I wish I had learned about drag shows in the 3rd grade. I think my life would have been maybe a little bit even better.
Yeah.
But I do have a few more questions here, if you have the time.
Yep.
And thank you for the wonderful and cogent answers you've given so far. And I think this sort of piggybacks on what you were just discussing. David Adler wants to know, he said, I don't think it's just the religious right who have lost trust in democracy. What does the data say about believing in democracy across ages and political orientation? Because I think we've both seen a sort of a disheartening or disengagement. So it's not just the right. What do you say to that?
No doubt. There's no doubt. There's no doubt that there's a distrust of institutions. There's no doubt that there are, you know, as more Americans become less religious, which is what we're seeing, that there's a broader trend of becoming less trustful of institutions in the country. It's very hard, as somebody who teaches college, to think about walking into the classrooms where I have taught, whether in upstate New York or Tennessee or anywhere else, and saying, this is the thing, right? We all believe and trust these folks who are in power, right? I mean, we do. That's not easy to do with young people, and I completely sympathize. I get it. So what do we do about that? I think what we reaffirm, right, is something like the very fundamental belief that democracy is an experiment in sharing power. It just says, look, we've never done it. This country has a horrific, tragic, disgusting past when it comes to chattel slavery, when it comes to attempted genocide of indigenous people, when it comes to Chinese exclusion, when it comes to indigenous boarding schools, when it comes to Japanese camps in World War II, when it comes to the treatment of queer folks. We could talk for the next 700 hours about the disgustingness of that history. But that doesn't mean giving in to authoritarianism and saying, we can gesture towards something like a more perfect union. We'll never get there. We've never had anything close. But democracy at its core is just, hey, there's a group of us. Instead of one person being in charge, we're going to share power. And everyone's welcome. Should we give it a shot? Should we all share power and disperse the power among every individual with a body and give everyone a chance to like flourish in the world or not? And it's so easy to give into despair. But instead of staring at the abyss, I think we should stare at one another and say, do you still want to do this together? Because I do.
I'm sorry, that just really resonated because at its core, that's a relationship question.
Yep.
We are, I mean, there's our interpersonal relationships, but we are in relationship and theoretically community with each other, and we're not doing that well. And sharing that, man, that's a basic kindergarten lesson. These, these folks have just jumped ahead, and it's like, whoa, maybe we need to go back to
Yep.
sitting in the circle and holding hands. Assuming everyone's washed their hands, of course. I know we are right at the top of the hour, and you've been offering some possible solutions in how we don't, just give into despair, because that's really, really hard. But KK Carney is asking, and I think this is a valuable question, so we're not doing this in a bubble. How do you talk to Christian nationalists to help them open their minds? Are they lost
Yeah.
to us, or?
This is going to be an answer that is really hard to accept. And I'll just say, I'm somebody, I think like many of you, who loves data, loves arguments, loves evidence, the whole thing. That's my jam. I love that. And if you caught me circa 2009 on Facebook, I was the guy saying, bring all comers from high school and everywhere else. Let's do the thing where there's a 700 comment thread and everybody's angry until 3 a.m. And
Yeah, no. Yeah.
and you're never gonna like win, because I'm ready. I got the data, I got the evidence, I got the stuff. And I think we all know it doesn't work. Not one person was ever converted when I did that. My wife would check in on me at 2:30 in the morning and say, hey, do you think are you gonna, is it time? Because you got to work tomorrow and this is not helping you or anyone else. I'll just say in brief, if you want to do this with your cousin, your uncle, your colleague, your friend who's down these rabbit holes, you got to ask them how they feel. And that's not because I don't think that evidence and data are important. It's because they have been told that you are a demon who hates America and loves Karl Marx. So if you say to them, what do you believe about this? And then you tell them why they're so stupid because you have the New York Times and other data, they're going to like, it's over. If you say, look, John, look, Beth, look, Victor, you seem really angry. What's up? What are you angry about? You seem really anxious about the future. Like, what makes you so anxious? Tell me about it. You seem resentful of people. Like, you think people have like come to get you in your country. Like, I don't know. Tell me about that. That's interesting. And you got to listen. And you're not going to want to. And you're going to want to feel like, I want to go take a shower and drink a beer in the shower and not do this anymore. And then though, here's what might happen. And it's a might. They might let you say the same. Hey, I got 2 little kids and I'm worried about this. And I'm angry that this happened. And it just makes me mad that these folks get more than other folks, or they don't have to pay taxes and I do, or something. And if you're willing to do this and you're safe doing it, you have an identity that is not being attacked and you're not in an unsafe relationship, then you might not be a demon-possessed, God-hating liberal Marxist who wants to destroy their family and their country. You might just be that human being who's their cousin, who's their friend, who's the guy they worked with for 10 years, who's the person they went to school with. And they might just be like another human being having a human being conversation. And there might be space there, not in that conversation, but in 7 later, for you to kind of express why some certain things are hurtful or scary or frightening to you about this potential president or that movement or this idea. It's hard. It takes patience, and it's not easy because you're going to want to not do it. And I understand why. But if you come out blazing with the data, the evidence, and you tell them, I'm now stupider for listening to you because that was the stupidest thing I've ever heard, we all know what's going to happen. No hearts or minds will be converted.
Thank you for that. And I have to say, in the, I don't know, 3 years or 2 years that we've been doing this, and this question has come up, which is a hopeful one. It's saying that you want to reach across the aisle, so to speak. How do I do it? And, because we're so smart, yeah, we want to do it with the data. But we also know this, the shaking of the finger, the you're so stupid, the none of that, the 700 comment thread, it doesn't do it. And we want a fast way, we want a Twitter way, and that just doesn't happen. But thank you for the caveat. I have not heard this before, that if you are coming from a safer space than other folks, you might be able to carry a little bit more water. on that. So thank you for adding that, because not everybody is safe
Right.
to make those arguments, or not the argument, but to listen
Yeah,
and to
totally.
to go forward. So I thank you for that, and I thank you again for the presentation. We are going to bring this to a close because we are 5 minutes over. I thank you so much, you and the audience, for the extra 5 minutes. I really do thank you for your book, for the presentation, for the work you're doing in the world. And if you in the audience have questions, or if you had questions, I thank you guys for jumping in there. I'm sorry that we didn't get to all of them, but if you missed any of tonight's presentation, it has been recorded and it will be available tomorrow at skepticalinquirer.org for you to rewatch and share. And as always, my thanks to Skeptical Inquirer, the Center for Inquiry, and of course, once again, all of you in the audience. I really am so glad that we had this time together. It was helpful. My name is Leon Lord. Thank you. Good night, Bradley. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Good night.